The state keeps an eye on us, but in the digital world, we can also see what governments and armies are up to where there are no independent witnesses. Whether it's about the crashed MH17 or the war in Syria, it is increasingly ordinary civilians who are revealing the truth. Thanks to the watchful eye of civilian detectives, it is now almost impossible to commit violence or injustices unseen. And, once seen, events can never be denied.
Ik denk dat iedereen met een internetverbinding kan dit doen. Zelf gewoon het net op kan gaan en gaan speuren eigenlijk. Speuren naar die honderden, misschien wel duizenden spelden in die miljoenen hooiberg.
This is Backlight. Welcome to an online investigation. Christian Triebert, an international relations student from Groningen, is part of a global network of civilian investigators, digital detectives who, using public online sources, try to find out how important events really unfolded. As a volunteer, he contributed to citizen journalist collective Bellingcat's investigation of flight MH17. His current focus is on the conflict in Syria.
We leven in een tijdperk waarin er ongelooflijk veel informatie beschikbaar is. Maar ik heb het gevoel dat het niet per se betekent dat er ook meer waarheid is. En daarnaast komt ook nog eens dat doordat de nieuwscyclus zo snel gaat, dat er soms misinformatie of disinformatie, die wordt verwerkt in bijvoorbeeld een headline. En dat begint dan al een eigen leven te vormen. Dus als ik dan 's ochtends de krant zou lezen en ik lees bijvoorbeeld een headline, dit of dat is er gebeurd, dan wordt het al onderdeel van mijn waarheid, van de wereld waarin ik leef. En vooral als het mijn wereldbeeld bevestigt. Als ik een krantenkop lees en denk, ja inderdaad, terwijl het misschien helemaal niet waar is, dan is het al onderdeel van mijn wereldbeeld. En ik vind het dus heel interessant om te gaan kijken, alle informatie die rondom een conflict zit. Ik denk dat dat de kern is. En ik vind het heel interessant om te kijken hoe die informatie soms verdraaid wordt. Hoe er soms leugens verspreid worden. En door middel van open bronnen heb je dus gedeeltelijk de mogelijkheid om die informatie te gaan factchecken. Ik werk met name 's avonds. Het is heel moeilijk om te stoppen. Dus je zit 12 uur, nou, toch maar een keer aanstal te maken om naar bed te gaan. Dan is het 2 uur, 3 uur, 4 uur. Nou, en als het dan echt, het voelt als een soort van puzzel die je aan het oplossen bent. Ik denk dat de start van heel veel van de analyses en onderzoeken die ik doe simpelweg waarheidsvinding is. Er komen veel claims naar buiten. En dat ik simpelweg denk, oké, wat is er waar, wat is er niet waar? Wat kan ik als burger voor informatie vinden over dit incident? Een goed voorbeeld is bijvoorbeeld onlangs een hulpconvooi dat gebombardeerd zou zijn geweest richting Aleppo in Syrië. Daar gaan er heel veel claims worden er gemaakt. Het zou Rusland zijn, het zou het Syrisch regime zijn, het zou een hulpconvooi zijn. Maar ik ga helemaal terug en de eerste vraag die ik dan stel, oké, waar hebben we het eigenlijk over? Een hulpconvooi. Kunnen we vaststellen dat het een hulpconvooi was? En zo ga je stap bij stap eigenlijk al die claims bij. Je ontleedt eigenlijk een hele claim, een hele zin die wordt uitgesproken.
In kleine stukjes.
In kleine stukjes. De eerste stap wat we vaak doen is natuurlijk om gewoon de locatie vast te stellen.
Hoe herken je dit?
Je ziet hier een elektriciteitspaal. Maar hier, vlak voordat die auto wordt opgeblazen, zie je hier allemaal een soort van gaten in de grond. En dan heb je dus een bepaalde clue die je gaat zoeken op satellietbeelden. En dan ga je dus eigenlijk simpelweg gewoon op zoek totdat je dezelfde locatie kan vinden die op zo'n filmpje getoond wordt.
Maar in heel Syrië ga je op zoek naar een weg met gaten?
Ja, klopt. Zodra je de locatie hebt kun je heel veel andere informatie vinden. Ja. Dus het is vaak gewoon de eerste stap die je doet met media, video's, foto's die uit conflictgebieden komt.
Wat een enorme interessante ontwikkeling is dat er steeds meer burgers of burgergroeperingen zijn die allemaal een soort detective-rol op zich nemen. En het nieuwe aan deze vorm van detectie, zou je kunnen zeggen, is dat ze niet zoals vroeger Sherlock Holmes zich op een puzzel richtte door middel van observatie. Of zoals de hard-boiled detective de macht willen opmaskeren door kritisch te kijken en het valse gelaat van de werkelijkheid eraf te trekken. Nee, wat ze doen is meer een soort politieke CSI, zou je kunnen zeggen. Het is teamwork, het zijn geen solisten, het zijn grote netwerken. Maar de crime scenes die hier investigated zijn politieke situaties die ze trachten te reconstrueren.
Today, Christiane is in London to attend the annual meeting of Air Wars,
I've seen you, I've met you on Skype.
Online, yes.
a voluntary research collective consisting of professional journalists, human rights activists and refugees, each contributing their personal experience and expertise to living room-based investigations into the number of civilian casualties of international airstrikes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
How's Baghdad today?
Yeah, it's just 2 explosions. So 11 were killed and 9 were injured.
That's terrible.
Air Wars was founded by former BBC correspondent Chris Woods and is often cited by the BBC and other news media as the only reliable source when it comes to the number of civilian casualties in war zones.
I've been a reporter for my entire professional life, and for many of those years I covered conflict. And my focus and empathy was always with civilians. I was always most interested in how civilians survived in those very traumatic environments. I think what we've got now with new technologies, with new capabilities, is the ability to allow civilians their own voice in the covering of wars, unmediated by our own governments and militaries. And through new technologies, places like Iraq and Syria, everybody has a cell phone in Syria today. Everyone has a cell phone in Iraq. Huge amounts of the material we work with is posted by ordinary men and women right at the centre of the fighting, getting their stories out. And we're taking and archiving and mediating that material so that they have a voice.
4 years ago, the Syrian Abdul Wahab Tahan came to England as a refugee. Now he helps Air Wars in their investigation of the airstrikes on Syrian territory.
Well, most of the stuff recently I've been looking for was in Aleppo, which was my city. It was one particular incident was really shocking for me because it was the street where I grew up in. I took a picture of it and sent it to my friends and said, "Do you recognize this street?" I said, "No, I can't recognize it because it was knocked up to the floor, to the ground." And then I said, "This is where we used to walk." He said, "Is it?" I said, "Yeah." So it's really, that was kind of the most shocking. That's it. That's the photo. Street where I grew up.
Wow. This is where you grew up?
Yeah, this is... I walk to school every day, that street. So, for example, if there was one day in Aleppo and there was like 15 incidents in Aleppo, and on that day you would read the mainstream media saying that 28 people died in Aleppo in various streets, various neighborhoods. While if you look at it in Twitter, you would see at least 100 tweets about all these places, exactly where, the names of the people, pictures, photos, videos, you know. A lot of time you see people who were stuck under the rubble and they needed a lot of help to get out. A father looking for his son or his daughter, or a mother looking for her daughter or her husband. So you would see that, you get that perspective from watching YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. You would never see it on mainstream media.
Well, we're in this parallel through the looking glass world where of 13 coalition members, of which the Netherlands is a key part, only the United States has admitted killing any civilians in 2 years of bombings. Every other country in that coalition all claim their bombs have killed no civilians at all. What we've also found is that among the coalition members, there's huge disparity in terms of transparency. You go from Canada, which was publishing very regularly where and when and with what it bombed. At the other end of the spectrum, you have the appallingly poor transparency of countries like the Netherlands. I think one of the things that shocked us most was to find that the Netherlands and Belgium in particular were two of the least transparent countries in the entire coalition. In some ways less transparent than the Saudis.
Nou, dit is bijvoorbeeld het kanaal van de coalitie. Zij publiceren dus filmpjes van luchtaanvallen die ze uitvoeren in Syrië en Irak. De meeste filmpjes zijn gewoon dit. Dat je gewoon dit kapot ziet gaan, weet je wel. Gewoon boem. Dus wat we vaak zien zijn de hele clean strikes op een oliejack, zo'n pomp. En hele mooie verhalen over. Moet je kijken, we blazen deze terroristen op. Of moet je kijken naar deze. Er worden zelfs filmpjes gereleased waarop staat: You can hide, but you can't run. En dan zie je hoe een auto wordt opgeblazen. Grappig misschien, maar ook een beetje onsmakelijk als je bedenkt dat heel veel luchtaanvallen, zeker in die stedelijke gebieden in Irak en Syrië, dat zeker niet alleen ISIS-strijders zijn of ISIS-doelwitten die geraakt worden. Misschien is dat wel het doelwit, maar er vallen ook heel veel burgerslachtoffers. Nou, dit is dan bijvoorbeeld een filmpje. 19 maart, Coalition Strike Destroys Daesh Headquarters in Mosul, Irak. Dit is een filmpje One Mission, Many Nations. Een slogan van de coalitie. En dan laten ze dus zien vanuit een vliegtuig hoe ze een doelwit bombarderen. Dit is een perspectief vanuit de lucht. Wat dan gepubliceerd wordt op officiële kanalen. En dit is het filmpje van diezelfde luchtaanval, maar dan vanuit islamitische staatpropaganda. En dat geeft het beeld van de grond. Tuurlijk, ISIS is verschrikkelijk. Maar zodra je niet erkent dat er bij bombardementen, die misschien wel bedoeld zijn voor ISIS, ook burgerslachtoffers vallen, dan negeer je iets wat verwoede kan veroorzaken. Want wat zie je? Dat er dus een speelveld ontstaat waarin dus een islamitische staat een filmpje kan maken en daarin eigenlijk volledige vrijheid heeft op het internet. Want die kan de claim maken, moet je kijken, er zijn hier 3 baby's en 5 kinderen en 10 vrouwen omgekomen bij een bombardement door de westerse coalitie. En er is niemand die daar tegenin gaat. Allahumma bi rahmatika, irham ibadika. Doordat het voor journalisten heel erg moeilijk is om in bepaalde grondgebieden te komen, is het gevolg van dit soort informatie, officiële informatie die gepubliceerd wordt, dat het vaak een van de weinige, soms zelfs het enige narratief is wat er bestaat over wat er gebeurt. Ja, en dat is dan gevaarlijk, vind ik. Want daarmee krijg je dus een soort van waarheid die misschien helemaal niet, of een waarheid die helemaal niet strijkt met de werkelijkheid. En dan is het moeilijk als je gewoon een burger bent en je kijkt en denk je ook, ja, wat moet ik nou geloven? Ik denk persoonlijk dat door juist het zo stil te houden dat je doet eigenlijk alsof er bijna niks gebeurt. Ja, op sociale media gebeurt er heel veel. De islamitische staat die grijpt om zich heen daar en die bepaalt dan een narratief dat bepaalde mensen ook kan beïnvloeden.
As long as there are places in the world where it is difficult, if not impossible, to gather objective information, there will always be black holes, places about which we are completely in the dark. Fortunately, networks of citizen journalists are acting as our eyes and ears, even in these places. Rami Jara, the son of 2 Syrian expatriate political activists, grew up in London. In 2004, he decided to return to his fatherland.
So this is Aleppo city. We know that there's about 100 to 150,000 people that are actually fighters. So these areas very much in a day are very tense. This is the after effects of a Russian airstrike on the Kalasi area of Aleppo. Yeah, there are still children here. The plane is still in the air. The situation is tense at the moment. And basically this is a marketplace. This is what the Russian airstrikes are attacking. These people here are the target of these attacks. I try to put myself in someone's shoes who lives somewhere in Europe or in Asia or in the United States who's trying to understand what's going on. I can see how confusing that is.
And why is it confusing?
Because there are, you have people that are on the ground and you have thousands of people that are on the ground that are disseminating information. Some of those people will be totally biased and will only say what suits them. Some of them will lie. Some of them will tell the truth, but to look at all of them, if you know none of these people, you don't know. And in some way or another, my narrative might be serving a certain state's narrative. So some people would say maybe a year back that whatever I was saying suited the United States. And anyone who supported Russia on an international level, like anyone who likes Russia more than, would say that, oh, this guy is lying. So we were also sort of, somehow we're victims to that. But getting information from inside Syria, for me, it's an obstacle. And it's based on my knowledge of who I know and who actually tells the truth and who doesn't and whatnot. And I think that's why you have media activism in Syria of people who believe that we should be telling the whole truth, because it will, in one way or another, provide you with the credibility that you need to reach the audience that you need, that effective audience, not just people that just want to use what you say as a bullet against someone else who's saying the opposite thing.
In Syria, Rami set up a network of local citizen journalists whom he directs from his editorial office somewhere in the border area.
These points show where we have information that we can collect. Either it's a correspondent or it's a collaborator that we work with. So this shows you that it's in southern Syria, it's in Daraa. This is just off the Jordanian border. So we have someone there. We have two people in Damascus, one in the besieged areas in Douma and one in central Damascus, who is, I can say this, but obviously I can't say who it is. In regime territory, this person is considered in much more danger than any of the other areas.
And why is that?
Because he's in a regime-controlled area, which means that if he is caught providing information or disseminating any information that's being used to show that the Syrian regime is carrying out crimes or is doing anything that is unlawful, then his life is in danger. In these other areas, like Aleppo and Idlib, and Latakia and Deir ez-Zor and Hasaka and whatnot, these areas are under military bombardment. They witness airstrikes. Obviously, this is a terrible situation. Obviously, it's a very scary situation to be in, but this is a situation that everyone here is subject to. Whereas in Damascus, our reporter in regime territory is a needle in a haystack. He's the problem.
بعد حي السكري في حلب النظام يستهدف عين ترمى بالغازات السامة.
شهداء وجرحى من الدفاع المدني في قصف استهدف مدينة خان شيخون.
We had a journalist in Raqqa. He was kidnapped by ISIS on a checkpoint roughly around here in an area called Tabaqa, and it's between Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor. He was kidnapped at a checkpoint because he had, on one of our shows, he had spoken against the Islamic State. And then after kidnapping him, they raided his home. They found a report that he'd written about locations of military checkpoints for ISIS, where some of them, their leaders are. We haven't seen him since October 2013.
So he's disappeared?
We think he's dead, yes, because when one of the areas here was liberated by the FSA, there was a mass grave with, I think it was 20 bodies in it. And one of the people identified and said that they think that was Rami Razoul. We're not sure. But his family used to have contact with the perpetrators, and now they don't. So we don't know where Rami is. We have no idea. And that's on our conscience as well, because he knew the danger he was undergoing, but this was in the early stages of ISIS. We never expected that something like that could happen. We didn't. But we negotiated with ISIS, and their demand was that me or Diyak go, and then they'll release Rami. We refused. We refused. It's a bit fucked up, but that's the situation we were put in.
Difficult situation.
No. أمين كيفك؟ طمني يا عزيزي، كيف الوضع؟
لله بخير.
كيف يعني شو صار من وقت عم تقلي ما في أي طريق للدخل أو طلعة أبدا؟
مسكرة حلب محاصرة لأنه
إيه بس نحن إيه بس نحن مو قلنا إنه إذا مبلغ مالي بالمبلغ المالي فيك تستخدمه لتطلع؟
تمام. هو المبلغ المالي اجباري بدي يعني حتى احسن اطلع من هون لديك يعني هون بتكلف يعني تقريبا انا وعائلتي يعني بكلفنا تقريبا شي $3000.
ما انا كنت بدي اعرف، انا افتكرت تعرف قلت لحالي انه تكونوا وصلتوا قطعتوا شوط يعني بهالقصه.
نكون وصلنا لشو؟
افتكرتك قطعت شوط بهالقصه، ماني عرفان انه ما صار شيء.
لا رامي انا ما قطعت شيء يعني انا قاعد بستناك يعني انت قلت لي انا بساعدك وكذا بس انا ما بعرف حدا بيناتهم.
اتركهم هلا اجلهم هلا رح اقول لك ليش بعدين، لانه هدول شبكه وحده. اوكي حبيبي
ماشي
يلا باي. No. So that's we have it's one of our colleagues in Aleppo who has a problem with he has a local problem since we were doing the reports inside. We did some anti-ISIS reports and we did a report that was I'm not going to identify it exactly just so it's not, but we did a report against a local group and he's in danger. This is news on Syria. So right now, Aleppo has been besieged again. Now, if there's any opening to get out of Aleppo, I think now, the second that siege is broken again, I think it will be broken again. I think this time a lot of people are going to say, okay, this is our chance, let's leave. And I think that's what the regime's tactic is. So and it's dangerous because if a lot of the citizen journalists leave, then what sources do we have? I'm not talking just about us. I'm talking about big news networks who depend on people inside. If they leave, there's no pictures.
And then nobody knows anymore what's going on there, right?
Except for what ISIS says or fundamentalists, strong groups inside the country that have that capability to, they have drones with cameras on them, etc. And the regime and Russia, they'll tell the story. And that's exactly what the strategy is. It's to make people like that leave. Make a situation for people who can tell the story not to be there. Journalists in Syria are a main target by everyone.
What is an urban war? You have a city into which enter several thousand of people that do not know these cities. These are combatants. They enter violently into the city. They enter all guns blazing. The minute those people enter a city, the city becomes like a sensor, like a very varied sensor, and everything within it starts recording. The field on the outskirts of the city start recording the tracks of the tanks or the vehicles that enter into it. The concrete on building start recording the impact of gunshots or shells thrown at them. People start switching on their phones. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of videos immediately starting to be recorded from various perspectives within it.
A.L. Weitzman is the founder of Forensic Architecture in London. He has brought architects, urban planners and scientists together to provide multiple perspectives on events that would normally remain under the radar. At the Venice Biennale of Architecture, Forensic Architecture presents the reconstruction of a US drone attack in the Waziristan region of Pakistan.
In June 2012, a video clip was smuggled out of the besieged region of Waziristan, Pakistan, the aftermath of a US drone strike in which 4 people had reportedly been killed. We combine the still frames from the video into a single panoramic collage and fit this into our model. There are hundreds of small traces on the wall caused by the steel fragments of the blast. The fragmentation pattern is less dense in parts. It is possible that the absence of fragments indicate the places where people were killed.
Forensics, as we understand it from CSI or the way it's been popularized recently, is really the work of the state, of the police against citizens and civilians. And what we try to do is to invert that gaze and to make techniques that allow citizens to look and survey the crimes of states. So we're talking really about counter-forensics.
Each fragment has hit the wall at a different angle. we run the blast backwards to reconstruct the location of the explosion in mid-air. This confirms the use of a delay fuse missile.
We locate that bit of video here in space and time in relation to that perspective of another video, in relation to a sound recording, in relation to a testimony that we locate the witness in space, in relation to exactly when the satellite has moved above, and try to use architecture as an optical device. The architecture is the only way to understand the relation between multiple sources scattered in space and time. It's a way of collecting and assembling the evidence. All of them need to to be woven together into a narrative that is convincing, into a narrative that could be either made into juridical evidence if you present in court, or into a political statement if you present in another forum.
At the Biennale, architect Lorenzo Pezzani presents his research project, Liquid Traces, an indictment of the failure of Europe and the international authorities to prevent refugees from drowning at sea.
Now, the sea might seem to stand in absolute opposition to the kind of architecture and spatial analysis in general. You know, a building is there and you know, you can read the traces on it. The sea is in constant flux, right? And the traces that our boat leaves are immediately erased by other forces. And in fact, you know, through forensic techniques, we can read the sea. We can trace the story of past events that have been left in the sea, you know, and that have been registered, in fact, by a multiplicity of sensors now, you know, that now have transformed the ocean into what we call a sensorium.
What traces might deaths at and through the sea leave? How to reconstruct violations when the murder weapon is the water itself? What are the conditions that transform the sea into a deadly liquid?
The project is a reconstruction of the fate of a refugee boat that was shipwrecked in the Mediterranean Sea under NATO's watchful eye, with fatal consequences. For his reconstruction, Pezzani used sea current models, satellite images and other public sources.
In the early hours of the 27th of March, 72 people embarked on a 10-meter-long rubber boat. At first, the overcrowded boat moved swiftly across the calm sea.
So the different dots that appear on the trajectory of the boat are all the georeference location that we were able to determine along the trajectory of the boat in different ways. So for instance, the first dot represents the moment when a French surveillance aircraft took a picture of the boat.
At 14:55, the passengers noticed an aircraft flying high above them. It was a French patrol aircraft, which transmitted a photograph and the boat's coordinates to the Italian Coast Guard headquarters in Rome. But as the end of the day neared, having covered only half the distance and with little fuel left, they decided to call for help. They phoned an Eritrean priest based in the Vatican, whose number has circulated widely across the East African diaspora. Shortly after the call to Father Zerai, a helicopter hovered over the passengers. Abu Kurke Kebato recalls the encounter.
One helicopter, he came to us, military helicopter.
How far was? I mean, very close to you?
Very close, he came to us down.
Would you see some flag, Italy or US or Canada?
No. I read it on helicopter, Army.
It was written in English?
In English, yeah, Army.
A lot of information that are simply out there. You simply need to know what to look for and where to look, right? For instance, we used ship spotters images, you know, like people who sit at the entrance of ports and that, you know, take pictures of ships that enter and exit the ports as a hobby. And through those, we kind of demonstrated that a specific kind of helicopter that was on the deck of a ship was there during the time of the event.
Believing rescue was now on its way, the driver threw overboard the satellite phone, fearing it might be used to incriminate him as a smuggler. Waiting for rescue, the migrants remained in place several hours, knowing they were running out of fuel. At daybreak, the motor stopped.
We collaborated with a series of NGOs that then formed a legal team which brought this case into various national courts. Our work was, in a way, fundamental to provide actual evidence. The report that we produced, where a lot of this material, of these maps and images are collected, was kind of attached to the actual legal case that was brought in front of several national courts.
Left without food or water, the migrants began drinking seawater as well as their own urine. After 5 to 6 days of drift, half the passengers had passed away. It is then, in a dead calm sea, that the migrants' vessel encountered a military ship.
So they are asking them for help, but they didn't get us anything, only taking pictures.
Despite witnessing the passengers' suffering, the military vessel left without providing them with any assistance. In so doing, it murdered them without touching their bodies.
No one has disputed our reconstruction of the events. No one has said, oh, this is not correct or this is false, etc. The response that we usually get is that, well, yes, this event happened, but it was not our national assets that were there.
For 14 days, the passengers had slowly drifted in the most surveyed waters on Earth. Despite repeated contacts, 63 passengers were killed by the reluctance of all actors to rescue them.
So this creates a kind of gap of responsibility where everyone sees that this violence was committed and this violence brought to the death of 63 people, and yet no one seems to be responsible for it. How do we address the injustice of thousands of people dying at the doorsteps of Europe? Something which in a few years hopefully will be called as a crime against humanity. And yet this is something that now is happening every day, and this is continuing to happen. By most people, it's not even perceived as a form of violence, right? This is, I think, what drives me mad. And all my colleagues within the Forensic Architecture Project, that's the kind of basic motivation to try to address these injustices and trying to introduce also new tools, to develop new languages, to do architecture, but also to do politics.
En het boeiende en complexe is nu dat er zowel vanuit de overheid als vanuit deze, je zou het bijna burgerdetectives noemen, die reconstructie maken, niet een volledig beeld is. Dat hoeft ook niet. Het hoeft ook niet volledig te zijn, als maar de gaten te identificeren zijn die zijn opgetreden in een morele infrastructuur. Boten die langskwamen en iets zagen, maar niks hebben gedaan. Informatie die niet gedeeld is. Communicatie die niet heeft plaatsgevonden. Reddingsacties die niet op touw zijn gezet. Waardoor dit, als zo'n reconstructie niet had plaatsgevonden, naar een ongelezen zwarte bladzijde van de geschiedenis was verplaatst.
Waar komt dat wantrouwen vandaan van de burger? Waardoor de burger denkt, ik ga mijn eigen oog in stelling brengen.
Ja. Nou, dat wantrouwen zit diep ingebakken in de democratie. Het kenmerkende aan de democratie is dat er geen vaste rolverdeling bestaat. De burger van vandaag kan morgen de regering vormen en andersom. Dus het is een voortdurend rollenspel, wat dus van de ene kant te maken heeft met de vorming van de macht, maar van de andere kant te maken heeft met de controle op die macht. En juist in dit soort situaties, waarin niet alleen nationale staten, maar op internationaal niveau geopereerd wordt, waar dus de democratie nog vele malen indirecter is, zo die er al is dat wakend oog ook eigenlijk het enige dat resteert. Om daar nog enig zicht op te krijgen en om te kunnen achterhalen wat er zich heeft afgespeeld.
A steady flow of images circulates daily on the internet. But from this stream of millions of images, how do you select exactly those images reliable enough to hold states accountable before a court of law? Especially for this purpose, the lawyers of the prestigious International Bar Association in London, a professional association for legal practitioners, have developed the Eyewitness to Atrocities app to capture images on a cell phone in such a way that they can be used in court.
When you open up Facebook or YouTube or other social media, there are thousands and thousands. Even in the Syrian conflict itself, they suggest there was over 1 million of these types of videos. So they're everywhere. So that's part of what we live with right now. The real challenge is, can you transition those videos from social media to a court of law?
Wendy Betts is a human rights lawyer and the project director of this app.
The rise in social media, you started to see a sea change in how human rights violations were being reported. You were getting information almost real time from the immediate site. The problem was that you also had the ability with digital media to provide very inaccurate information and share that quite rapidly. And so the idea behind the project was really to give the individuals that were collecting authentic, reliable, accurate information a way to do so that would allow them to rise above the noise, the misinformation, and the denials that were happening of what was going on. So the app is designed to look and function like a standard mobile camera app. And when the user installs
With the app, you can capture images of human rights violations. These are encrypted, stored in a secret location in your phone, and can be uploaded to a secure server.
And then we take the information and we store the original encrypted version in an offline server, and we make a copy that we decrypt and we put in our database that our legal analysts use to review all of the information that has come in.
It's bridging that gap between the use of videos to increase awareness of atrocities that have been committed, which is very important, but it's bridging the gap between doing that and being able to use that same video in a court of law so that you can actually use that video to bring to justice those that have committed those atrocities.
When the user activates the app, it activates the device sensors and it begins recording latitude, longitude, date, and time from a connection with the satellite. And then it's also recording nearby Wi-Fi networks and nearby cell tower identification numbers.
We start looking at what are those conflict areas and how do we get the app into Syria, for instance, right now? How do we, but there are others where we think there's potential. Kenya, for instance, new elections. And so that's been really interesting, the staff almost putting a map on the wall and saying, okay, where do we need to spend more targeted time to reach out to advocacy and NGO groups to get people on ground to understand the app and to use the app.
Hi. Hi. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Nice to meet you, Wendy.
Nice to meet
Finally.
you.
Nice
Yes,
to meet
you
you.
as
Come in.
well.
Come in. Mustafa, شو بدك شاي بلبنان؟ We've had an application before that was just for hiding content, but it wasn't. The problem that we faced was we didn't know where this stuff was being uploaded to, what server. And even after we did the training, it was. I mean, I trusted it because I knew the person that would do it. But the problem was convincing the people inside to use something like this and why it's important. But for us, it's. I mean, we mentioned yesterday that if there were a way where there was metadata that would document, that would actually make it clear that this was actually taken in this place, that would help us. Because we're trying to prove that a plane hit at this time of the day in this area when those that are driving that plane are saying that they hit in a different location at a different time.
Right.
So it would help us extremely in documenting that sort of violence, for example. So I wanted to see how exactly that metadata, does it actually provide that information?
It does. So that is the exact situation that we tried to design the app to address. Photos and videos can be very, very important to putting together the case. So for example, if you can show license plate numbers or types of weapons or uniform insignias, you can also show shrapnel or other pieces of leftover weapons that can link back to who might have used them. If you have photos or videos showing what party is manning a checkpoint, it can tell who's in authority over that territory.
So what if I am apprehended or caught and my phone is taken and searched and they find it? What does that look like to them?
Because we designed it to be used in places where there's a security risk and a risk of people looking at your device, there are a number of features. So the users can change the icon. So there's different icons they can use. And nothing appears in the regular gallery. So you could provide it at a checkpoint. If it were taken back to a lab for a full forensic analysis, what would be found would be bits of encrypted file. So it would be incredibly difficult to break the encryption.
But it would be clear that there's been an attempt to encrypt or hide something.
It'll be clear that there's encrypted files on the device, but we've encrypted them to a level that's fairly standard for other encrypted information. So that in and of itself is not necessarily suspicious.
Because I'll mention an example I'm talking about raging territory now. If you so much as just use a VPN in raging territory, the simple fact that you're using that VPN to the government is a crime, because it means you're basically hiding something.
Right.
And the way that they would gather information, once that they know that you have something that you're trying to hide, they no longer use technology to find out what it is.
Right.
They'll find out what it is by torturing someone.
Exactly.
But they just want to identify that there is something that's being hidden, and then the rest would just be torture.
But what about the places in the world where there aren't any eyes left on the ground, because even the bravest citizen journalists and human rights organisations have had to leave?
Most contemporary conflicts happen in a particular type of spaces. These are frontier zones. These are like black holes. These are places that are outside of law and outside of sight, where you cannot access, where no human rights researchers are going, where no journalists have been, when we have no information about it. Sometimes you need to shed light on those places precisely because there is no other sources to do that. Mm-hmm. There is no media.
There are no eyes on the ground.
There are no eyes on the ground. And one of those places was Saidnaya, a secret Syrian detention center where no journalists have been allowed in, no human rights monitoring group have been allowed in. In fact, the place is only known to the perpetrators and the victims.
Forensic architecture has made a reconstruction of Saidnaya, a secret torture prison in Syria, still being used by the Assad regime.
About 18,000 Syrians killed in the secret Assad regime detention centers. Nobody knows exactly the numbers. Nobody knows what conditions these people are held in. Nobody knows how the spaces are organized and what torture is being used. And we need to find other techniques to enter into these spaces. And sometimes the only thing that you have are the very traumatized memories of survivors.
The reconstruction is based wholly on audio clips and memories, as prisoners in Saidnaya were often blindfolded, denying them the right to see.
والرجلين للسجان تذكرون هل قد سرعة ولا سريعين كثير؟ لا أسرع من هيك. أسرع؟ هيك؟
They knew exactly what each guard would sound like when they were walking or when they were sneaking up to them. They knew the sound of food being delivered outside, and they could estimate by the sound of the bread bags falling how much food there was for them. And some of them started crying when they would hear that it's not enough. The food wasn't heavy enough, therefore it wouldn't be enough for all of them. So there's little moments like this that we're only able to trace back from asking them questions about sound.
صدنايا يعني الهدوء هو سيد الموقف، ما فيك تعلي صوتك، ما فيك تحكي بصوت عالي، فهذا الشيء بخليك تسمعي كل شيء.
The witnesses themselves felt quite empowered by the process because they were able to control what account they were able to give out to the world. They were able to say what happened through their own words and through their own images. And they speak up for everyone else who is still there, who is still experiencing this.
Can you imagine that in the future this could be used in a court of law?
Of course. I mean, what is on the website is only a fraction of the information we have gathered. And the information we have gathered could, of course, is evidence of the crimes going on within those facilities, but also a model that has voice, that is narrated, makes it really hard for anyone to deny the fact that those people have had those experiences, because now the world has seen it, and that's another function of it. Let's say is to claim that you're being seen.
Je kan niet zomaar wegkomen met enorme misdaden. Of in ieder geval, je kan er misschien nu nog wel mee wegkomen, maar het is niet ongeregistreerd. Er zijn mensen die meekijken. Er is een getuige, een digitale getuige, wat er is gebeurd. En er zijn mensen overal ter wereld die zich daarmee bezighouden. Die zeggen, dit moet gehoord worden, gezien worden. En dit moet vastgelegd worden en niet vergeten worden. En dat is heel erg hoopgevend. Dat geeft mij hoop, ja.